my name's Benjamin Howarth. I'm a freelancer. I've been working with Umbraco for about 5 years. I used to be part of the core team. Some of you will know me as Mr. Medium Trust, which is a name I still can't seem to shake. Today I am going to show off some very, very simple basics on how to get started with agile processes within Umbraco 7. So the Kickstart Agile is basically where we value processes more than the end product. We value the journey more than the actual specifics of how we're going to deliver the software. It's more about what we do in terms of the tooling and the environment and the ability to respond to change within a project and within our software scope. So, now, for those of you who remember the good old Umbraco 4 days with web forms, who's tried testing HTTP context? Anybody? Couple of people? Yeah, good. We're not going to go over any of that today. The great thing with Umbraco 7 is that we've got a whole new MVC pattern, which is both on the client and on the server. So we've got MVC testing client side, and we've also got MVX. I'll call it MVX or MVW for MV, whatever the hell you want it to be, on the client side, because I'm not really an advocate of believing that AngularJS is an MVC. Yes, they call it controllers. Basically, it's a view model. If anybody wants to have an argument with me about that afterwards, see me afterwards. Now my Jenkins build wasn't quite running properly, and I really had some issues, but we're going to kickstart with MS build. So we've got here an MS build file. I'm going to start by showing you the project structure, and the project structure is one that I'm sure most of you work within Visual Studio. Can I get hands up? Yeah, excellent, fantastic. So you'll recognize... trying to change my theme. Is that better? Excellent, thank you very much. Okay, so if you're familiar with this project setup, you'll see that down the side here we have our Umbraco sites. We have an extensions, which is where we stick things like our controllers, our models, our repository patterns, various other bits and pieces. And over here, we have 2 test projects, one for the extensions library and one for the web UI section. So in here, I've got some sample controllers that simply implement repository pattern, a very simple sample repository here that goes and gets a database. I haven't actually implemented an inversion of control framework or a dependency injection framework in here, but there are ways of doing that using Unity, structure map, and various other bits and pieces. There is something here which is an HTTP controller activator. When we try and activate controllers that we create, if we want to create them with dependency injection, Umbraco doesn't really like that out of the box. So we have to actually handle it using this HTTP controller activator, so which will new up anything that's an Umbraco controller by itself. Otherwise, it will go off and try and resolve it using our custom resolver, whether that's structure map or Unity, and so on and so forth. Now, who has tried unit testing Umbraco in the new version 6 and 7? Anybody? Couple of people. How did you guys get on? It took a while? Yeah? Found you had to build from source? You found that? Yeah. Okay. So what most people have discovered if they have unit tested Umbraco is that when you want to unit test, you have to include Umbraco.tests, because a lot of Umbraco's classes are marked as internal and they're only available to the Umbraco test project. So you have to go and compile something from source. Thankfully, here's one I built earlier, and I happen to have an Umbraco.test library already pre-compiled, which I set up straight off the 718 build last night. So we reference that within our project, and that's set up. And then we can actually go and implement a base Umbraco test. Now, what this does, I'll walk you through this code very quickly. This is the initialization code, which is our setup for the fixture. So this generates some fake settings. It configures them. It creates a new application context, an Umbraco context, and then it calls more initialization code to go and create things like database factories and our content services and various other bits and pieces. From this, we can go and get things like the loosely coupled services, iContent service, iContent type service, iPublish content service, and we can actually mock content within our Umbraco site, or we can use real content to mock our own custom behavior and test that that does what we want. So some other gotchas is you have to include these bits of files here, Umbraco settings, which actually replicates what you have in your config directory within a web project, and you also need to have an app config, which is effectively a straight cut of your regular web.config that you'd have in your Umbraco site. So things like configuration status, connection strings, and various other bits and pieces. Umbraco needs all of this stuff to be able to create the various contexts around things like the content services in the databases. Now, there's another little gotcha, which is that it also needs to be able to play with XML. We need to actually load up an XML context. So Umbraco ci.web.ui. So we have to go and get the umbraco.config file. So, and then load that into memory, get the XML content, which then gets parsed in and used in memory. So you can actually put fake site data in here if you so choose. You can create your own XML dummy content to then replicate behavior, things like maybe published content caches are corrupt, various other bits and pieces. Off the bat, notice how it also inherits from published content test base. So that inherits from other classes within Umbraco to do database fixture setups. So once you have this class in place, you can now go and start creating unit tests. So we will now go create a simple unit test. So base custom Umbraco test. And I don't want visual, I want nunit.framework fixture methods test. Now I can do things like this: application context dot services dot content service, and that now that will not return null. Normally, outside of the standard Umbraco site context, it would, but now we've referenced Umbraco tests, and now we've got our base fixture in place. Now it's inherited. The initialization code will actually go and get us those, at which point we can then mock them, we can stub them, we can inject them into our controllers, which is quite nice from a unit testing perspective. Now, the main crux of this is we want to get this into a continuous integration environment, because CI is one of the key tenets. Continuous improvement is one of the key tenets of good agile methodology, and reporting on what you've built and where you need to improve, fixing bugs before you write new code, having complete transparency on what's working, what's not, who's making progress, and who's not within your team. So this is an MS build file. Now, for this example, I'm using Jenkins, but this would also work with TeamCity. It would work with, if you're still using cruisecontrol.net, it should work with cc.net as well. So, and we're making use of quite a lot of custom tasks. Hands up, who's here familiar with MS Build? Many people? Anybody familiar with Nant? Not so many. Okay, so for those who aren't familiar at all, MS Build is the build tools that come with the .NET framework. It's all, if you're using Visual Studio, it's already included on your machine. It's what compiles your CS proj into a DLL, or your VB proj if you're a VB person, in which case I really pity you. But in any case, now, if you were to open one of these, it looks pretty similar to this. It will include things like your C# files, your JavaScript, views, various other bits and pieces. You can create your own, however, and that's what this file is doing, is it's creating its own project which goes off and builds each of these, but then it also runs extra things. So for example, we have a section where we're including JavaScript tests, which is one of the things I want to cover off today. Is now that we've got Angular, we can also unit test using dependency injection, Angular components, and our things like custom data types, custom dashboards, which we should be doing to help make sure that our editor experiences are as good as they possibly can be, and as robust as they can be. So I'll start walking you through this. We have a number of different properties here which are default, and then we're importing some extra help, including NuGet. How many people are familiar with NuGet? Most? Excellent. Okay, so for those who aren't, NuGet's a package manager tool. Use it if you're not already using it, because it's got some really awesome things. Now, what we've done in this solution is enabled NuGet package restore. So we've got a couple of files in here. We've got a config and we've got a targets file. So MS Build has the capability to import tasks. Basically, MS Build is a task runner. You tell it, I have these properties and I have these files, and then I want you to run these tasks in order And you can chain those up quite nicely, and you can multi-thread those if you've got very, very complex or very large pieces of software. So what we have here is a default target where we are telling it to build our CS projects, which is all 4 of these, our core projects and our test projects. We then have test assemblies, and we're excluding Umbraco tests because we don't want to run unit tests on Umbraco already, because Umbraco should be doing that already. And then we have JavaScript tests where we have this, and we're excluding a reference file, which I will go into in just a minute. Now, who writes mostly front-end code? Just a couple of people. Okay. Who writes a mix? Server-side? Okay, again, a few people. So this is allowing us to unit test both C# and JavaScript from the command line and output that in a way that a build server can actually pick it up. So there's a tool called Chutzpah, which is apparently a Yiddish word for everything or stuff. And Chutzpah is a great tool. It supports QUnit unit testing for the command line, and it supports outputting the results of unit tests into an XML file. So basically, it's NUnit, but for JavaScript, which is quite nice. So, and Chutzpah, now Chutzpah is really awesome because we can also run Chutzpah from Visual Studio. So if I look at this, if I go right-click, run JS tests, and now I get a test output window. And if I go to test, and if I go to Windows and Test Explorer, my JavaScript test will also show up in here. There we go, simple Angular provider. So we go in there, and we have a setup function and a teardown function like you would in any normal JavaScript unit test. So what we're doing is we're adding the Angular module, we're then getting the injector for it, and then we're getting a new root scope, and we're getting a controller, just a simple one that I've created, which is a fake property editor, and then it is passing in the control scope object, which you've got up there. So, at which point we have myfunc, and guess what myfunc does? It adds things together. It's over in here. We have a nice simple plugin that we've created. Has anybody tried creating custom plugins for Umbraco using the new plugin architecture? Anybody? No. You? 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay. So one of the great things about Umbraco 7 is that it's now making use of MVC areas so that you can set up entirely brand new back office plugins, and they will be discovered automatically using a JSON file at runtime. This is excellent because it means you can create entirely bespoke applications that are complete single-page apps in their own right, and then you can just simply drop them into Umbraco and get all the nice Umbraco UI stuff to go with it, which is quite cool. So we have a package manifest file, which right now is very empty, but we have a very simple property editor over here, and here is my myfunc. This is my view model. When you're creating Angular controllers, everything you want to test goes on your scope object, and anytime you want to set in a property editor, if you want to check out custom property editors, I believe Lee Keller has got some nice demos online. But what you generally do is scope.model equals new objects. What would then happen is whenever we change model, when you save a data type within Umbraco, so if this is a data type within Umbraco, model is the value of that data type. Changing that means you can store JSON objects, you can store XML serialization, ints, strings, anything you like whatsoever, which is pretty awesome. So functions are generally things like event handlers, things like when we want to fire custom events or custom bindings within our view. So for example, if I've got a slider control, maybe you want to change a behavior. Maybe you want to change behavior when you change the slider. Maybe you want to change the hue or saturation on an image or something like that. You would put a function on scope. What's great is that now we can unit test that. So, as we've seen, myfunc simply adds 2 numbers together, but it now shows up within simple test. Now, up here at the top are 2 reference files. So we're referencing the editor.js. One second. There we go. We're referencing the editor.js because that's the code we want to test. And then we're referencing a little section called Umbraco references, which contains all the JavaScript back-office libraries. This is quite a long file, and it includes jQuery, which is the HTTP context for JavaScript, because everything needs jQuery, and it's big and horrible and ugly these days. But we've got a JavaScript unit test, and now we've got a regular unit test in here. So, and we're going to go assert.pass. There we go. Nice and simple. At which point, we now have run selected tests. And that test fails for some reason. Setup failed on manipulator mock object. That's nice. So we have a failing JavaScript test at the moment, and we have a starter test, which is this. And if we go run tests, and that, build succeeded. Output, let's have a look. No tests found. That's nice. Okay, assert dot pass. That should work. Okay. Let's rebuild that. Go, Mum, play nice for me. Let's try that. Run again. Okay. For some reason, this test is refusing to run. Huh. JS tests. Okay, the demo gods really aren't liking me. Okay, but we've got a basic unit test there. We've got a JavaScript unit test. And what we really want to do is we want to be able to feed this back into a continuous integration environment. So back to our MS build file, we have, let's just shrink that down a bit. We have a whole bunch of items here, which are the projects we want to build, the C# tests, the server-side tests we want to run, and then the JavaScript tests we also want to run. We then have a couple of extra properties. These are for running Schutzpah. Schutzpah is great because it's also, not only is it available as a Visual Studio add-in, so you can just right-click and go run tests, you can also get a NuGet package which downloads at your solution level, ends up in a directory that comes with your entire source control environment, and then you can run it straight from the console. So, and it will output an XML file, which we can then pick up in a continuous integration environment. So, which is then what this meat does. So we have first line, which is MS build, and that goes off and builds the projects that we specified, which is these. So all RCS projects, all 4 of those get built and compiled up. Next, we then follow it with an NUnit task, which then passes in the assemblies that we want to test. So that is referenced by that. The at means it's a group of items as opposed to a property. You'll notice the dollar prefixes properties, and properties, the at prefixes items. So files, projects, actual things that exist. Properties are simply variables. So we then output to an NUnit results XML file, and we output a little bunch of parameters that say how many tests passed and failed. Finally, we then actually build, this is a little bit of a hack around, but what we do is we actually build the same file that we just did, but because we're importing NuGet, we want to import particularly, when you call build on all of these projects, NuGet will by default go and download all the different packages. It will go and download Umbraco CMS. It will pull in and copy all the files and references, which means you don't need to go checking in DLLs into your source control. Please stop doing that. So next person I discover who does that really will be on off my Christmas card list. But you'd be amazed how many people still do that. However, NuGet allows us to keep our source control as small as possible by basically saying we rely on these dependencies. If anybody's used NPM or Bower, they basically do the same thing for JavaScript or Node in that case. So we're calling to build this and restore packages because at this point, Schutzper still hasn't been pulled down. It's a solution level item rather than a project level item. So even though we've built all the projects, pulled in all the references, Schutzper's still not there. So this brings it in, at which point we go and run Schutzper with the various files. And I've been suffering from a little bit of works on my machine with this. So I'm going to run this and you will see a very, very, very pretty cacophony of lines. That's NUnit kicking in right there. And that's Schutzper kicking in. And that's where my tests fail. Nice. That's good. Okay. I'm wondering why that failed. But up until that point, NUnit still ran and it still tried to discover tests within the various DLLs. So did it actually discover any? Test run, no, 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 and no. Well, that's useful. Public class, yes, that's a fixture. That's fixture. There we go, let's try that again. Base custom Umbraco test, test method 1. My bespoke test. Rebuild. Okay, let's try that one more time. And that would appear still not to be discovering tests, which is quite annoying. Okay. And what's that second failure? JS simple test.js. Log messages, manipulated mock object, data type, simple data type editor. Ha, that's why. I know why that's failing. It's this bad boy. And I want to go back to my JavaScript. Plugin editor. For some reason, having dots in the name seems to screw it up. So if we try that, and let's run that again. Off we go. No, it's still erroring. Untitled, one failed. Argument code. Data type editor. Not a function got undefined. Interesting. Umbraco CI.web.ui plugin, simple plugin, back office, simple data type editors, editor.js. Ah, that might be why. Let's try that. We take that off. Schutzper. Fantastic. Now we actually have a passing unit test. Hey! Thank you. And even better, and for my next trick, hey, it even works in Visual Studio. There we go. So, but Schutzper is a great tool if you are trying to customize your back office. It's a fantastic capability to allow you to inject and mock using QUnit. It gives us the kind of standard tools that we're used to in C# in terms of unit testing and dependency injection, but in the environment that we want to have a proper MS build. And if I'm right, the last bit I should have is an NUnit test somewhere. And let's try and get that running. Extensions, based on Umbraco test. View, Windows. Right. Yes. Right, so let's try that one more time. Rebuild. And View and Test Explorer. Windows, Test Explorer. Run all. Okay, so that's discovering, but for some reason this still isn't, which is quite frustrating. Debug test. Very unusual. Okay, for some reason my NUnit isn't liking me today, but everything else is working, which is quite nice. So, back to our MS build file. And now our unit tests are passing, and then let's try and actually pass this in to Jenkins. Here's one I made earlier, I hope. We do a commit, and we simply send this up. Fixed testing. And we push, and we push. And once that's pushed, we go close, and we go build now. Off goes Jenkins. So, out of curiosity, who has experience with Jenkins? Fantastic, couple of people. Team City? A few more? Excellent, yes. I know you got experience with Team City. Fab. So, Jenkins is based off another CI tool, which is actually called Hudson. So it seems very strange. I was commenting on this earlier that all the good continuous integration servers all seem to be based in Java for some reason, which is probably the worst possible language in which to write a build server. But here we go. Test runner failed, and then you failed as well. Exited with 909. Okay, I know how to fix this. One last thing we're going to do is we're simply going to ignore exit code equals true. And we'll send that up again. Git commit master. Fixed. And push. Let's just check it works locally first. Off we go. 1 and 0 failed. Fantastic. And that worked. And then let's hope this works. Console output. Thanks project. Build now. So CI is a good idea even if you don't have unit testing. It gives you something that at least on a staging server is something like, I have a site. It works or it doesn't work. If not, why not? What did I change? And having continuous integration and continuous deployment is a very healthy thing to have when you're developing sites, applications, whatever it is you choose to have. Gonna play nice. Finished. Failure. Due to exception, no test report files were found. Huh. Okay. But no errors. That'll do. I'll count that as a win. I'll count that as a win. In any case, that is how you get Umbraco 7 unit tested both server-side and client-side using this large file, Chutzpah, and some nice little Visual Studio tools. The whole thing is available on GitHub as of right now. Because that's where I've been pushing to during the talk. Are there any questions? No? None at all? Sorry? At github.com/code, I'll actually write it up in a nice big github.com, code gecko, Umbraco, CI demo. There you go. Sorry? Oh, there you go. Right, there you go. That's where you can go find it. So it's all available online if you want to go check it out. And hopefully that gives you a nice introduction into how to set up Agile with Umbraco 7 with both server and client-side unit testing. So, and I think the guys want me to wrap up quite quickly because we're running over time. So thank you very much.